There is one clip on YouTube that I believe is responsible for destroying the learning experience, the desire to learn the Thai language more than any clip on the internet. Hi, Stuart J. Raj here. This is part 2 of the world's most complicated writing system, aka Thai, Debunked. Now, it's been a couple of days since I put the first clip out. I actually recorded part 2 at the same time because it went so long. I thought, okay, I'd do it in 2 parts. The feedback that came in from the first clip, I thought, I better record part 2 again, partly because I don't know why there was lag on my camera that I did. Perhaps it was the Bluetooth, so I switched it out for this earphone. But another thing, there was some interesting feedback. There's one particular comment that it just got me thinking. They said, look, me putting this clip out, even though the guy's information was false and misleading and perhaps may have misled many learners, that he had the right intentions in putting it out, so he didn't agree that I should be putting out a clip to show an alternate view, or actually bring out the facts of what this guy was speaking about. And I am wrong for putting it out because I could have destroyed his will to learn. And I don't know, I struggle with that. I don't want to destroy anybody's will to learn. I am a firm believer in rational thinking, in critical thinking, and seeing 2 sides to an argument, learning to be able to see both sides, even if you don't agree with something, or maybe you'll learn something from somebody who maybe knows something about what you've talked about. And so I believe in having, I think his name's Xidnaf, whatever Xidnaf, his clip out there, and then having my clip out there. At least people now get to see 2 points of view. And if there's another person who wants to put another clip, you can put there. The more points of view we have, the more information we have to make our own minds up and to learn from it, and the better. I don't think you should say, oh, it's wrong that you went and put this out to discredit this guy. Even though the information was wrong, he meant well. Anyway, so I'll try and be a little more sensitive in this clip. And the other thing is, I don't know how old that guy was. I didn't know if he was a kid. He was making out as though I was picking on some little kid. I don't know. I just thought if you put it out on YouTube, well, it's fair game, and you have to be an adult or at least 18 to put clips out. I might be wrong. But anyway, let's move on. A quick recap. So there were all of this confusion and confused diagrams that were put out there by this original clip, trying to make out that Thai is some insane system that has no rhyme or reason, and talking about consonants and vowels all over the place. And the first point we talked about Thai was an abugida, so that was that consonant. So you see the blue one is a consonant, so if that's the unaspirated K sound, and then you have this sound is think of a guy peeing, so that's salat means vowel. So and what happens is, if this is your voice is going to activate whatever's sitting in this place first. So you think of it in a 3D block, it's going to activate the first and then the ga. So the initial point, and I think one of the main confusing points for foreigners learning Thai, is that supposing you get something like this, and so we have vowels that maybe I call these ones triangle vowel shapes. So this is the ear vowel frame. Now when I say vowel frame, have a look at this. Despite, if you look at it front on, yeah, there's something up top, there's something on the left, something on the right, but you need to think of them in blocks on a vowel frame. So this is the vowel frame block. So again, when this voice activates, when we think in time, it activates the first. So that's, and then this actual vowel frame, you see it's all activated at once. That's the ear frame. And so that's ear, gear. And so if I change this vowel back here, this is the same. So it's an unaspirated back of the throat, or we represent with a K, ear. It's not kia, it's ear, gear. You can see that the voice is activating this first, and then it hits the ear. So ear, gear. This is how abugidas work, no matter what language, whether it's Hindi and Devanagari, Tibetan, Burmese, Cambodian, Khmer, they all work on this same principle. And so I can change this. This symbol here is a an M sound. So let's see if it hits this first. It hits the first, activates, and then ear becomes mia. Okay, so that's Abogita's 101. Don't look at them as this two-dimensional thing you've got before, after, top, bottom. It's not. They're three-dimensional syllable blocks, and the voice just activates each block like this over time, like a barcode scanner almost. The other thing that we talked about was that the Thai writing system is based on this Brahmic beautiful map of the mouth. It's a 5x5 grid. So we have 5 points of the mouth, which this one here we don't have in Thai, so they both turn to the teeth. So back of the throat, palate, teeth, lips. So this is ga ka nga, cha 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 nya, ta ta na, and ba pa ba pa ma. And if you speak Hindi or any Indic languages, that would sound very familiar to you as well. And then we have actions, aspiration. So ka ka, originally voiced g, but we don't have voicing anymore. So ka ka, all these are pronounced the same. Nga, beautiful, beautiful, logical, rational system. 5 points of articulation, 5 voice actions, which reduce to only actually 3 voice actions in Thai, even easier, and even the semi-vowels fall into this system. And so that's what we recapped from the first one. Now, let's continue on to see what our young friend Mr. Xidnaf has to say about the Thai language and why he believes it's the most complicated writing system in the world. I hope that I'll be able to convince you otherwise.
I'm not going to try to explain how these are pronounced differently, partially because I don't really understand it myself, but the point is, Thai didn't have these weird retroflex consonants, so when it took words from Sanskrit and Pali, it just pronounced them as normal alveolar consonants. But King What's-His-Name wanted to be able to look at a Thai word that...
Okay, so again, I just mentioned in the original clip, calling him King What's-Its-Name, it's really not good. But anyway, let's move on.
Came from these languages and tell how it would have been spelled and pronounced in the original Indian language.
Okay, this isn't any different to what we have in English or any language where you retain the spelling. So we have many French spellings or other, we have different things. Sometimes Qu might be QU in English, sometimes it might be KW. It doesn't matter. We know, as speakers of English, this is how it's spelt, and you can actually see where something's come from the spelling. Exactly the same principle in Thai, and it actually is a similar principle right across any languages that have been influenced by Sanskrit.
He made up 2 sets of letters, one for each way of pronouncing it in the original Indian language.
Okay, he didn't make up 2 sets of letters. He just had a one-to-one correspondence of the letters. You can see here that all he's done, if I do this switch back to the Devanagari, he did a one-to-one letter match. It's just that we know that then the voicing was lost in these letters, so these are pronounced the same. That's all. But he didn't invent new letters. That's just silly.
Resulting in the Thai writing system actually having a bunch more symbols than it does sounds. This might seem pretty silly, but it actually happened a lot in history where people wound up with more symbols than sounds so they could accurately transcribe things from other languages.
And again, notice how his imagery throughout this is all to reinforce this whole concept of confusion and complexity. It's not. It actually all has a logical explanation and makes sense.
We have the letter C and the letter K in English is because people in ancient Rome wanted to be able to accurately transcribe things from ancient Greek. And there are a couple diacritical marks that don't mean anything different in English, but we took in order to preserve the original spelling of the language we took it from.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up.
You can see Thai started out pretty complicated when it was...
Again, this schematic diagram, it's there to reinforce how difficult Thai is. It's interesting too, because since I put that first clip out, some people have actually commented back. One person in particular said, yeah, he actually saw this clip a while back when he was starting learning Thai, and he gave up because in his mind he had convinced himself, or perhaps he had, before he even started, that Thai was going to be this unconquerable mountain. This schematic doesn't help, but it helps his argument.
Invented. It was an abugida that looked like an alphabet, it had a bunch of tone markers, it had a bunch of duplicate letters for transcribing things from Indian language.
Now notice how he's going through all of these confounded things that he's actually built up, these straw men himself, so then he can have this huge impact saying, see how confusing it is? It's actually not. Everything you've just mentioned that is easily explained away.
But that's nothing. That's not even the beginning of why Thai is so complicated today. Because
Ooh, I'm excited. Tell me.
far the biggest reason Thai is so complicated is... Number 4. Thai has changed a lot over the past 700 years. All languages change over time, but much of the time the way we write them down doesn't. Because of this, in general, the longer it's been since the last time a language had major spelling reforms, and the more the pronunciation's changed since then, the harder it becomes to tell how something is pronounced based on how it's written, and vice versa. For the Thai language, the biggest thing that's happened is that a little while after the writing system was invented, it underwent a massive sound shift.
Okay, these are unrelated things. Every language changes, and Thai changes as well. Actually, the way that Thai is spelt today is different. There are words that are spelt differently from 30 years ago. It's continuously changing. That is very different from what you're about to talk about now in sound shifts. Let's listen.
Vocalized sounds, specifically the b, d, j, and g sounds, merged with their unvocalized equivalents, becoming pronounced the same as the sounds p, t, ch, and k. This would have made it impossible to tell a lot of words apart if it weren't for one thing. All 3 of the Thai language's tones split into 2 tones.
I've just opened a doc up here to show what he's actually talking about. In Thai, because what's happened in the Thai throat, we've talked about how it closes at the end. So if you have a r sound at the end, that doesn't happen in Thai. So what happens is r, and also all the L sound, all just get caught there. R, tongue sticks and it turns to a n sound. So in Thai and in Lao, if you get an R and or an L at the end, it would pronounce. So this word here, I'm just going to put it in Roman spelling first. So if I have this, and then I have an R sound, that would be pronounced gan. Okay, this would be pronounced gan, of course, and this would be pronounced gan. Not only that, in Thai, you can't pronounce consonant clusters, especially at the end. So say we have a word like this, gan ya. What happens in Thai is there's a silent marker that goes over this, and so that also gets pronounced gan. Or if this word, because that gan doesn't, that gets cut off, and so that would be pronounced as gan as well. But if we actually type these in Thai, have a look at this. This would be, you know exactly what that word is from the word kara, to do, but it's gan. You know that would be gan. You know that even that comes from the word kala, meaning time in Sanskrit, but it's pronounced gan, but we see exactly from the spelling what meaning it is. Supposing you had something like that, gan, and this was there, that would also be gan, and then this, that would come from ganja, but we know that from the spelling that this means gold. So these all come from Sanskrit words. We see the meaning of the original word instantly in the spelling. This is hugely beneficial, especially in a language like Thai where sounds have merged together. Compare that to Lao. Now, this is the equivalent in Lao. This is gan. So Lao actually did what he's talking about. Rather than maintaining the original spellings, they write it phonetically. So that means that all of these words, if they were to be written in Lao, would be this. Gan, 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 and gan. Those are all pronounced identically. Okay, so it is Thai, gan, gan, but in Lao, basically you get the picture. Because of the beauty of the Thai spelling system and its one-to-one correlation with Sanskrit letters, you can actually see the etymology of words and you won't be confused. But can you imagine now, as kids are learning Lao, it's just not making sense, and some of them may not even realize that 2 words actually come from different roots or they're different meanings because they're spelt identically in Lao. I don't know what your preference is, but my preference is actually maintaining these original one-to-one spellings, and then we just know the sound shifts. Okay, they sound the same, but they are spelt differently, and we can see the original word and the original meaning. Okay, so let's get back to see what he's talking about.
whether the consonant that came before it was originally vocalized or unvocalized. So now, a lot of tone symbols might be referring to two different tones, and we have even more duplicate consonants.
Oh, okay, so he's talking about now the tones which actually have nothing to do with those original spellings, because actually the spelling remains. The spelling remains the same, whether the sounds are lost or not. We keep the spelling and we keep the tone markers, and we just know how they work. And so it's not an issue.
Letters than we started out with. To figure out which tone a symbol represents.
Okay, this is not a tone. I think I mentioned in the first clip, this is bo, e, be, and this one actually makes it short. So this needs to have a consonant afterwards. So normally you would see this word ben, but this is not a tone marker. This is a vowel shortener for this.
To know whether the consonant that came before it was originally vocalized or unvocalized, and decide based on that. My favorite example of this is...
That's absolute rubbish. Thais don't even think that at all. It has nothing to do with vocalized or not vocalized anymore. The actual tone rules are based on these classes. The high, mid, low class, which were originally these registers of the voice, but no Thai is cognizant that these were once vocalized or anything and trying to make all of these jumps in their head. It's a very rational, logical system. So here you can see the system. So originally, yeah, if we have a look here, and let me just get the IPA up. So this was the IPA, ka, ka, g, g. That's what he's talking about. These were the vocalized g, j, d, d, b, which by the time they got to Thai, the vocalized ones were lost. And so this low class were those original ones in a lower register because they use the voice g as opposed to k, g, k, the voice drops down when you use your voice. Middle class were the ones with the stop throat, high class ones with a puff of air over it. But you can see them are all laid out beautifully here. And they just learn the rules to pronounce the tone. And I talked about tones in the first one. Go up and back and have a look at that. I explained how actually tones are throat positions or throat degrees of the throat between the beginning and the end of a syllable. And pitch is just a byproduct of what happens with the throat. But it's not confusing at all. And all Thais know is that if they come from this group, yeah, they've got one set of rules when you use a tone marker. When they're from this group, they've got another set of rules, and this another set, and actually the rules basic crossover. So there's not an unlearnable amount of rules. There's some very basic tone rules that get used by these markers. These markers are not like Vietnamese where you have a marker for each actual pitch. What they do is basically say this was the original throat index category for this set, this set, this set, and we know now that the sound, say for Bangkok, is like this. You can spell something identically, but if you're using then the Isan set or the Northern Thai set, they would keep the same spelling, and you just learn the rules then for that marker or that throat index in that region, in that geographical region, and you'll be pronouncing perfect Northern Thai or perfect Northeastern Thai or Southern Thai. The spelling never changes. The tone markers never change.
Thai aspirated unvocalized alveolar plosive, otherwise known as the t sound.
Notice how again he's trying to make something sound more complex than what it is.
Which, because of duplicate letters to transcribe Indian languages and subsequent sound merges, has 6 different symbols to represent it with. But
yep, okay, 6 different symbols. They're these ones. Originally these ones which had the different letters. And we have a look across in Thai. Bang, yeah, these. But it's not an issue. We just know that these are the original spelling letters, what I just mentioned a minute back with the whole Gan thing. I think it's actually good because when these letters are used, we can see the original word from Sanskrit, which word it was. If you didn't do that, you would have all of these words that are spelled identically that are actually different words. I prefer using the different letters.
Doesn't stop there. The tones have done even more moving around and shuffling since then.
Again, he's used all these squiggly lines to make it even more confusing.
Based on the consonant that comes before it and the vowel that the tone is on, so you pretty much just have to memorize this table of different...
Yeah, it's not an issue. Actually, I developed these stories almost 20 years ago. You can see you've got the coyote there. I've just made some visual stories to talk about it. You've got 3 cliffs out there. But through memorizing these couple of little stories, you get the entire tone system in 5 minutes? You can just visualize these stories that will show you, and you can actually feel the way your throat's going to move with the tones. It's not an unconquerable mountain to climb to learn these things. It's actually quite straightforward.
And tone symbols to figure out which tone to use. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why would the Thai people go on using this writing system if it's so insane and complicated?
Because it's not insane and complicated. It's beautiful, it's rational, it's logical, it's symmetrical.
Well, for one thing, there's just tradition. I mean, which is easier in the short run? Convincing everyone in the entire country to use a different writing system that you just made up, change all the road signs and replace all of the important records, or just continue teaching kids the same weird rules you had to learn growing up too?
Sorry, but that's just really arrogant. And you're speaking from a position where you actually don't understand the system, and then now you're suggesting, yes, well, I'd come up with a much better system, but you people are just silly, and so you keep using this same old silly thing, and you are actually the one coming out looking ignorant and nonsensical in this.
For another thing, consider this. If you plopped a person from 15th century Thailand down in the middle of modern day Bangkok, they'd probably have no idea what anyone was saying. It'd be like...
It's just silly. Yeah, they actually, it'd be closer because we speak Central Thai here, but all languages change.
Trying to read Shakespeare times a trillion. But at the same time...
Times a trillion? No, it actually wouldn't be that different. There'd be some different words there, but people would kind of get what was going on.
Be able to read all the road signs and communicate with people with writing just fine, because the writing hasn't changed at all in the past.
It actually wouldn't be any different to right now with different dialects, because, like you said, the writing would stay the same. So if you go to Northern Thai, or actually even different provinces, they pronounce all of these words differently, and some of them aspirate. For example, the t, Totahan, in Northern Thai. So if you go to Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, it's pronounced as a stop throat. So the word tahan is tahan. So it becomes that. But it doesn't mean that you don't understand them. It's just the way that their dialect is spoken.
1100 years. In the same way, people who live in Thailand today can go up to ancient temples and dig up centuries-old documents and perfectly understand the words written by their ancestors.
Rubbish. No, they don't. These are actually written in a very different language. And this script that you see, you've got the Ramkhamhaeng stone here. It's actually a totally different script. And that's a whole different story again, which I won't go into here. Fascinating story. Go look it up. But that's actually a very different script to what we're used to see, to what we're reading now.
Dozens of generations ago. If they were to change their writing system, they would be cutting themselves off from all that heritage, all that culture. Besides, how cool is it that every time anyone in Thailand writes something, they're essentially retracing the steps their language has taken the past 700 years in order to figure out how it would have been written back then.
Yeah, it's not different from almost any other language now.
Every time anyone reads anything in Thai, they're basically looking at a representation of how it was written centuries ago and figuring out how it should be pronounced today. If they're...
Nah, not really. It's changed. It's changed over time. One big change that has happened, if you compare, say, other languages, before, one of the reasons that led to confusion, King Rama IV, he actually brought the letters up from being these sunken letters. So if I had the word school, we would have sk as one block. The sk would be in a block down here, and then oo, and then the final school. He wanted to make it look more Western, and so he brought this sunken K up here. In Khmer, in Burmese, those sunken letters are still there, even in Lao. But for some reason, Thai doesn't have those. So that actually looks more Western. In the past, Thai was written differently.
One thing to take away from studying the Thai writing system, it's that language isn't just beautiful for how perfect and simple it can be. It can also be beautiful for being complicated, for being arbitrary, and for being a living, modern-day...
It's not complicated, it's not arbitrary, it's a beautiful, logical system. Go learn it.
Of our ancient past. It does kind of make me wonder, though, how do sound changes like these happen? I mean...
Okay, that's it for that clip. I hope that these two clips that I've put out at least may have convinced you that Thai is definitely not the most complex writing system. What is, people have asked, actually Japanese? People say it's a logo graphic system, but in Japanese, for example, you've got the hiragana, katakana, and kanji all mixed in together. And so each, say, Chinese character, then you could have 4, 5, 6 different pronunciations depending on the actual word it's meaning. And so you have to look at the hiragana and the katakana, or the hiragana around it, to work out actually which version of the word it is. And basically you have to be a speaker of Japanese to be able to fully kind of anticipate what this word is. A lot of time the kanji will just be a placeholder for a general meaning, and then your understanding of the context will interpret then what actual word that is. Japanese is a hugely complex writing system, but many people think, okay, because I guess people have been learning Japanese for a long time too, it's just become kind of, yeah, you learn your kanji and your hiragana, katakana, and you do your JLPT and work your grades up. Other difficult systems, even Khmer is almost the same as Thai in the writing, but in Khmer you have two different basically alphabet fonts, one for standard, say, sign writing, script, print writing, and then another one for just normal sort of book text. And some of the letters are very different, so you've almost got to learn two different sets of alphabet, the same amount of numbers as letters as you have in Thai, but twice. So Khmer is also difficult, but again, it's the same principles. Nothing is hugely difficult. If these kids that are native speakers of the language can learn it at only a few years old, well, anyone can actually learn it. You just need to see the logic behind it. Okay, one thing that I did want to mention, because it came up in a discussion subsequent to my last post, and it's one of the questions that's always asked, and that's, why doesn't Thai use spaces? And actually many languages don't use spaces. Have a look at this. So we talked about, this is the vowel frame, and these vowel frames, you think of them in set forward from the actual consonant, and so it hits that. So when you're reading, whether it's Thai or any of these languages, you don't think linearly, you think in these frames. Okay, and so just like I have the colors separated there, have a look at this. So if I turn this one off now, and so I've got this word here, even though all those letters look like they're running in together, subconsciously Thais are seeing it like that. Not only that, if I had another color for, say, these ones here, so this letter here, so this first one here, Suna, that can only come after a first letter, so that would be Sanam. And we know that this one here, this green one on top, it can only come over the beginning letter of a syllable block. And so Thais know that that's going to be the first letter of another syllable or another word. And so in the Thais subconscious, there's a split down between there. So eventually you'll see these frames come up, and the actual vowel frames will delineate the actual words as well. So subconsciously, when you start thinking in vowel frames, you don't need spaces anymore. And this is the same with Burmese, with Khmer, with even like when you're reading Devanagari Sanskrit, the old ones, when it's just these long strings, as you're reading, you don't need it. And they've even shown things in English where the letters can be all jumbled around and your brain just locks into the word groups. It's a similar thing that happens when you're reading Thai. So why don't you need spaces, or doesn't it make it unnecessarily difficult not having spaces? You don't really need it. They don't become an important thing because the vowel frames delineate each syllable block, just like you see in there. Okay. Anyway, if you want that, you can go to jacademy.com, and there's a bunch of other resources there, free resources that can help you learn Thai. And I've even started putting some up in Chinese. If there's anything else, let me know, and I'll try and make some content on that for you as well. Thank you very much. I'm Stuart J. Raj. Bye. So that's the end of part 2. If you like this, actually, my book, Cracking Thai Fundamentals, I started running the course back in 2000 for journalists, NGO workers, government officials who came to Thailand. They needed something to help them hit the ground running. And many people had started learning Thai and they'd gotten frustrated because they would say, why is this like this? And many native speakers of Thai say, well, I don't know. Same as in English. There are many questions, I'm sure, as a native English speaker, if somebody asks you, I don't know, I just speak the language. And so I wrote this book to try and answer as many questions as I could. Actually, I ran the course for about 17 years. The book is a culmination of having run that for so many years. But hopefully that has many of these answers in it for you, and then the cultural links as well. Anyway, if you want that, you can go to jacademy.com, and there's a bunch of other resources there, free resources that can help you learn Thai. And I've even started putting some up in Chinese. If there's anything else, let me know, and I'll try and make some content on that for you as well. Thank you very much. I'm Stuart J. Raj.